Hello, everybody. We are going to get started right away. My name is Dan Rest. Hopefully you can see the screen with the Leadership Launchpad slide. I know that my colleague Devesh is currently admitting everybody from the lobby into the full meeting. Um, for your information, this meeting is being recorded, and just want you to be aware of that. So we've got a lot to cover today, and we have over 300 individuals registered to attend today's webinar. So I'm going to just pause briefly just to give one last moment to allow people in from the lobby, and we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to this program that we're calling Leadership Launchpad Essential Skills for First-Time Leaders. Now, we have a mix of people in today's session. We have a fair number of individuals who are, in fact, what we might call the target audience, who are, in fact, themselves first-time or early career leaders. But we also have a lot of attendees who are responsible for the training and development that is provided to first-time leaders. So because we have a bit of a mixed group, you'll see the content that we deliver today is some mixed content because we want to be relevant to everybody that's attending the session. Session etiquette. Everyone is by default on mute. If the spirit moves you and you have something that you verbally want to share, go ahead and raise your hand, and we will and just mention that you would like to say something, and we will unmute you and allow you to say something if there's something that you want to verbalize. You can also share thoughts and comments in the chat function. Throughout today's session, I'm going to be monitoring and keeping close track of the chat function. So if comments are made, I am going to try as much as possible in real time to respond to whatever those comments might be. And so to the degree that we're able to, in a 1-hour webinar with over 100 participants, we're going to try keep it as engaging and interactive as possible. My name is Dan Rust. Excuse me. I am the head of leadership development for Infopro Learning, also the author of a book titled Workplace Poker, which is essentially focused on navigating the work environment, and it's designed to help individuals who are focused on accelerating their career trajectories, navigating essentially the game under the game in the corporate work environment. You can see the link to my leadership podcast called Leadership Disrupted, and also my LinkedIn link, which you are welcome to connect with me via LinkedIn. The book Workplace Poker actually is going to be relevant in today's session because there is a lot of content related to navigating the political waters, the emotional waters, the cultural waters within an organization, which is one of the areas that sometimes first-time leaders struggle with a bit as they get put into leadership situations for the first time. As a further introduction, the team that I work with at Infopro Learning is a team of researchers, developers, and instructional designers focused exclusively on the leadership space. We develop virtual instructor-led training and also on-site classroom instructor-led training. You can see all of the various topics that are available on the screen here. And if you look at early career development, you'll see the very first title is called the Emerging Leaders Series. And today I'm sampling a significant amount of content from that Emerging Leaders series. So you'll see that here in just a few moments. All of our leadership development programs spring from a competency model. And we'll be sharing a document with you after this webinar that includes a lot of these graphics and a lot of the notes. So you don't necessarily have to memorize everything that you see on the screen. However, this competency model Obviously, it evolves as one progresses from being a first-time leader to an emerging leader to a mid-career leader to more of a senior leader. But the essential competencies remain the same. It's simply that our capabilities within each of those competency categories hopefully continues to rise and evolve over time. So, with that said, one of the first challenges for early stage leaders is understanding what the expectations are of the people that they are leading. And for many first-time leaders, they're assigned perhaps a small team of individuals in a particular functional space. And you could certainly look at that leadership position as purely functional management, where you're simply managing the productivity of a set group of people to do a set function with set accountabilities. But what we're finding is that more and more early stage leaders are being asked to take on larger roles, larger jobs more quickly. And in fact, we have many situations where individuals are being placed into a first-time leadership position. They may have been a strong individual contributor for many years, and then suddenly they find themselves leading a team of 12 or leading a team of 15 or 20. And in many cases, a complex team, not simply a team of individuals who are doing the same work that that individual contributor has been doing for a decade or longer. So the jobs of early stage leaders are becoming more complex. And I thought I would just share, when I have conversations with leaders at every stage of their careers, almost almost every week, I probably have 3, 4, 5 of these kinds of conversations. One of the general themes that I see arising over the last year and a half to 2 years is that employees are asking for more. Employees want more than perhaps they wanted 5 years ago, 10 years ago, several decades ago. Employees are looking for more meaning in their work. They're looking for more work-life balance. Or what one person said to me a couple of weeks ago, he corrected me. He said, I call it life-work balance. He said, even the fact that we put work first rubs him the wrong way. So he calls it life-work balance. They're looking for mentoring, coaching, guidance. They're looking for values alignment, meaning they want to work for companies whose values align with their own individual values. And certainly decades ago, this used to be a nice to have, but in today's world, it's becoming less and less of a negotiable. It's becoming a must have. And we find that employees at every level, from the front line all the way to the executive suite, employees want more from their employers. They want more from the work itself. They want more from their career trajectories, and they want more from their leaders. And this is where it impacts first-time leaders. Because if a first-time leader comes into the role thinking that for her or him, their role is simply managing productivity or managing tasks or managing workflow, that may very well be a part of the leadership job. But in fact, what they will find is that their employees want more. I had an early stage leader talk to me about a week ago, and she said, the thing is, I'm in this role to deliver results, and I've got a plan for delivering results. But in addition to delivering results, I've got to be a coach, a guide, a mentor, sometimes a friend, sometimes a quasi-parent. I've got to care. I've got to have empathy. I've got to create psychological safety. And she went on and on. And she said, it's not that that's wrong. It's not that I don't agree with that. She said, I just don't know how to do all of those things. How do I find the time to be all of that and in different ways to different people? The good news is, I think she had her finger on the pulse of the new role of leaders today. She's still struggling with how to execute that role. And that's part of what we're going to talk through today. But I think it's important as leaders enter a leadership role for the first time, that their view of what that role means is expanded beyond simply, hey, I'm just driving the workflow of a group of people. Over the last several years, we have conducted a variety of surveys, and we've partnered with a company called Frontline Learning in conducting surveys of emerging leaders. And I notice here, because I know this is gonna bug me. So in real time, I'm gonna correct a typo, because otherwise this is gonna bug me. There's a survey of 5,000 emerging leaders. We'll go back to the slide share. So um, we have conducted a survey of over 5,000 emerging leaders and over 3,000 direct reports of emerging leaders. And based upon those surveys, this is both a self-assessment of capabilities and an opportunity to provide anecdotal feedback. So essentially what we were asking from emerging leaders was, now that you've been in your first significant leadership role for about 6 to 8 months, what do you wish you had known? What would have helped you? And then we've asked them to assess themselves in terms of various capabilities in alignment with our overall leadership competency model, although we streamlined and simplified it to make it more relevant to an emerging leader. And based upon those results, we then also asked direct reports a series of similar questions, and anecdotally asking the direct reports of emerging leaders, what do you wish, or what do you think would help that emerging leader in terms of making them more effective or more capable? And in fact, in 3 areas, we noticed a big difference in the self-perception of emerging leaders and how their direct reports are perceived. And those 3 big areas of difference in perception were in the areas of communication skills. And I promise you, I won't do this anymore, but I know myself, and I know that this little slight anomaly that occurred in the final edit will bug me. So in these 3 areas, communication skills, the ability to inspire engagement, and authenticity or perception of authenticity. Interestingly, those were the 3 areas where there was the biggest gap or difference in perception between the 2. Now, we're not gonna go through the survey itself in great detail, and in fact, I've taken out some of the categories and some of the information, because I just want to share with you what serves the purpose of today's session. And part of what helped us develop the content for today's session is also the anecdotal feedback that came from those surveys. It's fascinating to read through the comments of direct reports and the comments of individual leaders. But ultimately, when you look at communication, when you've got an emerging leader who feels like he or she is doing a pretty good job of communicating to his or her folks, the people that they are leading, and then when you do a survey and the actual direct reports are scoring that person significantly lower, you know that there's a communication challenge. And part of the challenge is the illusion that communication has taken place. If the leader is thinking, hey, I'm doing great with them, I'm communicating more, we're having more meetings, I'm sending more emails, I'm talking more to people, so I'm doing more communication, but we'll find out later that communication effectiveness is not always a function of communication volume or communication frequency. In fact, sometimes more can actually, or less can actually be more when it comes to communication. When we read the survey results, again, I'm not going to go through all the survey results, or I'm not going to break out a bunch of them, but just here are some of the kinds of comments that we see from the direct reports in those survey results. And one of the interesting things that came out of this survey is when we say to the direct reports as part of the survey, the results will be confidential, but they will be shared directly with the individual, but shared confidentially. We get a certain level of openness, but when you say, and we hold true to our word when we say the results will be confidential and will not be shared directly with that individual. They'll be simply used for study purposes. We got a lot more openness, a lot more willingness to share the dose of reality, so to speak. So we've taken all of that data, and we actually, for Infopro Learning, we developed a series of programs that we call our Emerging Leader Series, which is actually a 10-week program that offers 2 hours of content per week over 10 weeks. And it's designed to address the gaps that were highlighted ultimately from those survey results. And within the 10 2-hour modules, you can see on the screen here the various topics that are covered. But again, I'm not going to go into these in detail. We'll follow up with a document that has all of these details. But we ultimately developed 12 modules, 12 2-hour modules and these modules were developed by curating content from our larger programs. For example, if you look at week 10, we have emotional intelligence for leaders. Infopro has a full-blown 2-day emotional intelligence for leaders program, and we curated that content down to the 2 hours that would be most relevant to an early stage leader, a first-time leader. Of course, expecting that first-time leader, for the rest of her or his career, they will be exposed to more and more training on EQ. They will read books, they will go to workshops, they will go to seminars, et cetera. So what we were looking to do was to develop the springboards, each of these 10 categories or ultimately 12 categories, springboards to help those individuals begin their development process as leaders. So the rest of the content that I'm sharing with you is curated or sampled from various elements of that 12-week Emerging Leader series. And as I was going through this, I was honestly kind of cherry picking, because as we deliver the program, we know which concepts really resonate, which concepts really grab people's attention and hold them. And so let's start here. Let's start with, you've probably heard the phrase, the imposter syndrome. And we have many first-time leaders who have been exceptional individual contributors, and they've applied for a leadership role. They've wanted the leadership role. They're put into the leadership role, but some part of them feels like, I might be a bit of an empty suit. You probably heard the phrase, an empty suit. Or on the other side of that coin, the flip side of that coin, someone gets put into a leadership role, and the direct reports or others around them perceive them as an empty suit. Until you prove otherwise, I'm not necessarily going to just give you my faith, give you my trust. And this speaks to one of the differences in today's world versus perhaps a decade or two or three ago. We find that the direct reports of all leaders, including emerging leaders, tend to be more cynical, more doubtful than they were in decades past. So 20 years ago, you might be given the role as a leader, and the people who report to you start with the assumption that, hey, you're probably qualified because they wouldn't have given you this position anyway. So I'm going to start with trust. I'm going to start with an assumption that you are competent. I'm going to start until you prove otherwise. I'm going to give you my trust. Until you prove otherwise, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. In today's world, that has flipped to a large degree. You start with the assumption of, it's your job as a leader to prove to me that you have the competence, that you have the gravitas, that you have the experience, that you have the insights, the wisdom, the whatever. It makes it much more challenging for first-time leaders, for early stage leaders. Generally speaking, they don't start with the automatic trust of the people who report to them. Now, obviously, there are lots of variances of this, and there are lots of exceptions. So I'm speaking broadly about large trends, and you may very well be in a very different situation where you have earned the trust. If you're a first-time leader, you've earned the trust. Maybe even when you were in the role as an individual contributor, you earned the absolute confidence and trust of the people around you. So you're starting in your leadership role absolutely not being perceived as an empty suit. But part of my guidance to first-time leaders is, don't assume trust. Don't assume confidence in you. Don't assume belief in you. Think of it as your job to fill the suit, your job to earn the confidence or trust. And while I'm using suits as a metaphor, this of course affects white collar, blue collar, virtually in any kind of collar. Um, the other concept we like to share with first-time leaders is the concept of the leadership microscope. And what we mean by that is when you take on your very first leadership role, suddenly everyone around you, think of it as if they put on a new pair of glasses that are slightly more magnified than in the past. They're paying slightly more attention to the words that you use, slightly more attention to who you talk with, who you laugh with, who you joke with, whose ideas you listen to. They may even pay attention to in virtual meetings when someone is sharing ideas. They pay attention to, are you nodding when one person shares ideas and then someone else shares ideas and your face goes a bit flat. So you, without any intention at all, you may be communicating that, hey, you're really buying what she's selling and you're not so much buying what he's selling, so to speak. The leadership microscope, as you move up the corporate hierarchy, that microscope gets stronger and stronger and stronger to the point when you are in a senior leadership role. You might have a bad day where you're just not feeling well. And the butterfly effect or the reverberations from you having a bad day where some people think, oh, she's mad, or oh, he's angry, or he's depressed, or he's not excited, or he's not this or that. There's so much room for misinterpretation because people begin over interpreting everything that you do. So as a leader, as a first-time leader, it's important to understand that your standards of behavior will probably need to shift upwards ever so slightly. Um, you used to go out every Friday night to have drinks with colleagues. Not saying necessarily that you can't do that anymore, but your behavior um, at those events probably needs to shift upwards at least slightly, if not more than slightly. Your behavior in the work environment itself, your engagement with others. There are so many opportunities at a micro level for people to observe what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're thinking. I even had a situation where there was some feedback for a first-time leader because once he was put into a leadership role, he worked in an office kind of cubicle environment. And he had a habit of coming in during the day. He suddenly had an office for the first time. Everyone else was still in cubicles, and many of the colleagues that he'd worked with in the past, they were still in kind of the cubicle farm around him. But uh, during each morning, as he walked into the office or walked towards his office, there were particular individuals where he would just stop and say hi. He would just kind of link it. He'd have his mug of coffee past the cubicle and say, hi, how's it going? Well, what was noticed was that there were just two or three people who he said hi to every morning, and everyone else he kind of passed by, not intentionally, but it was suddenly a noticeable behavior. For when he was a colleague, nobody noticed who he said hi to, who he didn't say hi to. And it's such a small thing, but it's a noticeable thing. Someone is asking if we're recording this webinar. Yes, we mentioned at the very beginning we are recording the webinar, and we'll make the recording available to everybody uh, who's attending. Actually, to everyone who's registered. So that leadership microscope, my sometimes when I'm having direct conversations with early stage leaders, it starts to feel unfair. They start to feel like, well, it's not really reasonable that people would interpret these things, but it's just it's the way it is. Now, some early stage leaders actually start to like it because when people kind of view you as you're in a bubble, they're paying closer attention to you. Some of the other behaviors that come along with that is people are less willing to tell you what they really think. People are more willing to laugh at your jokes, whether they're funny or not. And as a first-time leader, first-stage leader, it's a very mild effect, but that is when it starts. You probably really notice it with senior executives. When senior executive walks in the room and he's sharing his annual plan, and you're looking at it and you're thinking, I don't get it. I don't get I don't connect the dots. But other people are saying, "Oh man, that's fantastic. That's amazing. How insightful. You're a visionary. Amazing, amazing, amazing." And in your mind, you're going, what in the world? What world are they experiencing? Well, that actually starts at the very beginning. So, as a first-time leader, understand that for the first time, people will start to work you a bit. And it's very subtle, but it's important to be aware of that because otherwise, I mean, it's the first time when that barrier of communication starts to come down between you and the others around you. And it's simply human nature because you now have a slight degree of control over the future of other people. And anytime you have that environment where there is a slight degree of control over the future of others, people start to be just a bit cautious, a bit conscious of what they say, when they say it, how they say it. There's also, to some degree, an element of theater in leadership. So whether it's fair or not, you are putting on a show. Your level of energy, your enthusiasm. And I'm not saying you have to be over the top. I'm not saying every day you should just show up rah 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 and everything is sweetness and sunshine. There are no weeds in our garden. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying though is, again, understand you are under the microscope. There is a bit of theater and you are part of the show. And so when you know that you are part of the show, it's important that you show up with some attention to how you're dressed, attention to your personal grooming, attention to the words that you use and the words that you don't use, attention to your communication with others. Essentially, it is important that you up your game because, again, you are putting on a show. And I forget who, I love this quote and I forget where it comes from, but authenticity is the main thing. And if you can fake that, you've got it made. Truly, authenticity, I'm going to put in quotes, is important. It's what people yearn for. It's what your direct reports yearn for. They will say, I want someone to be real with me. I want someone to be genuine with me. I see there's a question here. How do you recommend leaders show up when they are not in a great space? I think it shows great vulnerability and builds psychological safety to not be sunshine and rainbows all the time. But how can leaders make that work for them and others? That's a fantastic question. So, what happens when you're not having a great day? What happens when you're not having a great week or a great quarter? It is important, and it's hard to give a complete answer to such a deep question. But let me say to you, put them first. So ask yourself, what do they need from me? So whatever I may be personally going through, whatever the organization may be going through, if what they need from me is quiet confidence, then that's what I provide to them. If they need to see me as a bit vulnerable, I just had a situation with a leader whose entire organization had just been informed by senior leadership that they were going to be moving from remote work back to the office gradually, and the gradual timeline had already been communicated, and people weren't feeling great about it. And the leader said, "Well, do I just show up the next day?" Rah rah saying, hey, this is going to be great. Do I just carry water for senior leadership when in fact I know it's going to be really challenging for a lot of people? And we talked our way through it and we found not just the right messaging, but the right positioning for him so that he could be authentic and he could acknowledge the challenges and also at the same time acknowledge the strategy and the purpose for the strategy. So it doesn't mean you have to show up all sunshine and rainbows, but if you are, you should be very conscious of your bad days. I'll just share a bit of individual insight. For me, afternoons are tough. If I get overwhelmed in the afternoon, if I've had a long, rough day, I can get crabby. I can get crabby at 3, 4, 5, 6 in the afternoon if I've been overwhelmed all day and now I'm getting so much more overwhelmed. And I have to be very conscious not to bring that edge to the meetings, to the conversations, because I haven't found any environments where that edge serves people. In fact, many times I've had to circle back and apologize because I didn't bring my best self to that particular meeting or my best self to that particular situation. But we have them. We all do have less than great days. Um, so let's talk briefly about, we're going to use the term gravitas. For those of you for whom that might be a new word, gravitas, it's one of those things. You know it when you see it, you know it when you understand it. Gravitas for a first-time leader can be kind of tough because people know this is your first leadership role. You're probably on the young end of the age spectrum. I don't want to make assumptions, but you're probably in your early 20s. You may very well have people in their mid and late and 20s and 30s reporting to you. Oftentimes we're finding first-time leaders in today's world, they end up with multiple generations reporting to them. They end up with situations where people with more experience, more years in the workplace are reporting to them. And the issue of gravitas comes up. Like, how do I come across as having substance, having heft, without being a faker, I see a comment here. I always teach new managers to acknowledge the bad news or the difficult situation, but be forward focused and try to find the silver lining or positive out of it. Don't pretend like it isn't happening, but also we can't dwell on the bad. I think that's great advice, Carly. Um, Here are, based on our research, the top 10 blunders made by some first-time leaders the blunders that actually inhibit the perception of gravitas. I'm going to go through them very briefly, but let's just start with the lack of functional competence. If you're in a situation where you're being assigned to a group of people and you do not have what might be expected in terms of functional competence. So maybe you're not an IT person, but you're assigned to lead a small IT team, or maybe you're not a creative person or a marketing person, or actually the most common situation, maybe you're not a salesperson, but you've been assigned to lead a sales team. The lack of functional competence, understand that your team probably will not come to you and say, man, you're kind of like a paper tiger. You don't, you're sort of an empty suit. You're going to have to recognize your own empty suit, and you're going to have to work hard to fill up that empty suit, to acquire that functional competence. Rarely will any of them come to you to say, look, here's what you're going to need to build the credibility that's needed. Now, luckily, I think in most cases, we assign first-time leaders based upon their success as an individual contributor. So most of the time, hopefully, they start with functional competence. But I'm going to give you a couple of, I'm just going to cherry pick a few of these gravitas blunders. The two that really jump out at me, if you look toward the bottom, being too humble, but also being too confident. Both of those can be gravitas blunders. If you're too humble, if you're too self-effacing, it feels to your team as if, well, then why are you even doing this? If you don't feel like a leader, then why are you leading? On the other hand, going too far over the top, being too confident. So how do you find that mid zone, that Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where the bed is just right, just the right level of softness and hardness? That comes from time, from experience, from maturity. But it is important to know that there is this mid zone between humility and overconfidence that you hopefully can find as a first time leader. I'm going to go to the others, and being two-faced is one that pops up. And what the survey results mean by that is, if you are one person to upwards to your leadership, and then you seem like a different person when you're focused downwards toward your team will notice. Your team sees that. They see that in your demeanor. They see that approach. They see that in your behavior. And so when we go back to authenticity, what people are looking for is who are you? And they expect or they hope that you are the same person, whether you are talking to your boss or your boss's boss, as you are when you're talking to them directly. Now, the content, the topics, may very well be different, but be sensitive to any shift in your demeanor or your personality. And then I'm going to go to accountability avoidance. As a leader, generally speaking, you are broadly accountable for the productivity of your team. So when your team drops the ball, or when someone on your team has, some particular issue or challenge, the accountability isn't just on them. The accountability is on them and you. And if you are flagged as one of those leaders who's constantly pushing accountability out to others in order to avoid it yourself, again, that's going to have a negative impact on your gravitas. As an individual contributor, accountability was easy. I know what I'm responsible for. I get my work done. I do my work, and then it produces a result, and I own it one way or another. As a leader, being accountable for the productivity of others is a whole new realm and a whole new mental realm, because essentially what we're saying is, yes, they own it and you own it. Shared accountability isn't 50-50. Shared accountability is a concept of 100-100. You own it and they own it. That's kind of a radical approach to shared accountability that first-time leaders, many of them initially struggle with in terms of that ownership of that accountability. The other thing that gets in the way of gravitas is leaders who haven't yet put time and thought into the deeper reasons why they are leading. Oftentimes, a first-time leader will, well, actually, I'll back up. I'll share you a story. I was delivering a leadership session to a group of senior leaders focused on strategic leadership. And part of that session was helping these senior leaders who are leading broad organizations um, develop their own leadership manifesto. And for each of them, it was very individual. For each of them, the reasons why they lead, why they do what they do, were very different. And part of the exercise was to guide each of them through a development of their own individual leadership manifesto, their own leadership brand, so to speak, and how that brand would be both communicated and presented internally, and how they could become their individual brand. And a comment was made as we were wrapping up and getting feedback from various participants. And the chief administrative officer of a Fortune 500 company said to me, "You know, I should have done this 30 years ago." He said, "Yes, this is great. This is good. This is going to be helpful. But where this would have really helped me is if I had started thinking about what do I want to stand for at the very beginning." He said, "Instead, I was put into a functional leadership role where I was leading a functional technical team, and it was all about produce the technology, produce the products, get the work done." And he said, "I didn't really stop to think much about why I was doing what I was doing, why I was leading, what I wanted to stand for." And he said, my core values have not changed that much. They've changed a bit over time. But he said, I would have been so much better off if I had been thinking about how to align my leadership with my core values from the very beginning. And so that's one of the recommendations we make for first-time leaders, is that most likely, unless you bring it up, your organization is not going to spend a great deal of time with you to say, all right, we're going to put you in this leadership role. Let's spend some time thinking about why you want to do this, what you want to stand for, how you want to align with your core values. So what they're going to do is give you the job. They're going to give you the job. You're going to get the tasks. You're going to get the direct reports. You're going to get the accountabilities. You're going to get all the stuff that needs to be done. And it's probably up to you. Now, we're not going to do this individual activity today, but I'm going to include it in the follow-up document that we send out to you, because there are some exercises that you can go through to begin to think through what is important to me. Why do I want to lead? How do I want to show up as a leader in the workplace? And what do I want that to mean to the people around me? And that thought process, and it's not just, this is one simple activity to start the process, but the thought process itself is designed to take you deeper and deeper into your big why. What is driving you? And if what's really driving you is, hey, I'm just personally ambitious and I want to make more money, that's not wrong, but it's probably not enough, because the people who work for you, they don't want to work for you just in order to help you make more money. I had a leader, goes back almost a year, where he came to me after he'd gone through this exercise, and he said, what I realize is I've been trying to motivate my people uh, to do things in order for me to achieve my goals. And he said, sometimes I've been kind of obvious about it. And he said, in fact, I have to motivate them to help them achieve their goals. It has to be, he said, yes, I am motivated to achieve my career goals, but I'm not going to get it by just pushing people to help me achieve my career goals. I have to help each of them achieve their goals. And then through that process, and he said, as simple as that sounds now, when I say these words, he said, it sounds really simple, but it's an aha for me, where I realize, yeah, it's ultimately about me, but first it's got to be about them. So again, I'm going to include these exercises in what we share with you, because I find that if a first-time leader can begin thinking carefully through why she wants to lead, why she does what she does, how she wants to show up, what is that going to mean to herself and to others in the workplace? Ultimately, what's the promise that others can count on from you? What's the promise from your senior leaders? You want your senior leaders to be able to say, hey, if we assign her to a team or a project or whatever, we know she delivers results. You want the team that you work with to feel the same kind of promise, not just in delivering the results, but in the how those results ultimately get delivered. And I do believe there is a lot of power in taking the time to write out your own individual leadership manifesto. I had thought for a while that I might share a few examples. I'm not going to do that, because what I don't want to do is lead anyone down a particular path. What I would want you to do is to start with blank paper or a blank screen, answer some of the questions that you'll see in the documents that I share with you afterwards, and then ask your own questions. Ultimately, spend time thinking, talking. What do you want to stand for? Create an initial leadership manifesto for yourself, knowing that that manifesto is going to evolve almost, I would say, every year. In fact, part of your own personal development planning that I would recommend as a leader is that at the beginning or the end of the year, you revisit your manifesto. You ask yourself, where have I been true to it? Where have I fallen from it? How do I want it to evolve? How have I grown as a person? And as I grow as a person, my leadership manifesto should grow and evolve as well. It should be truly, I hate to use the trite phrase, but it should be a living, breathing document. So setting that topic aside, yes, we'll be sharing. The question came, we'll be sharing the recording and follow-up documents. Question is too confident, also coming across as a know-it-all. Yes, a know-it-all, or a person who's unwilling to say, I don't know, unwilling to say, I'm not sure. And we all know, if you have a leader who isn't comfortable acknowledging what they don't know, it's kind of scary, because if you see their blind spots, but they don't see their own blind spots, but that's the person who's driving the ship or who's steering the vessel, you can get kind of wobbly in terms of your confidence regarding the direction that the vessel is being driven. So let's talk about feedback. Um, when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I got some feedback for you," what's your initial reaction? I mean, I know me, and it's probably true of most of you. Your initial reaction is, "Oh man, all right, what did I mess up? Or what is it? What's the deal? All right," and you try to steel yourself because almost almost never does somebody say, "Hey, I've got some feedback for you. That was fantastic. That presentation was amazing. That thing that you did was just earth-shattering." No, usually when people come to you and say, "I have some feedback," it's a less than positive thing. So when you are a first-time leader and you're put in a position to deliver feedback for individuals, it's important to understand that their reaction is going to be the reaction that we just discussed. The moment you say, "Hey, do you have a few minutes? I want to talk to you about something that I observed." Or, "Do you have a few minutes? I have some feedback for you." There is going to be an initial, they may not share it, they may mask it, because again, under the leadership microscope, they may not share with you exactly what they're thinking. But as with you as a leader giving feedback, I'm going to back up. As a colleague, when we give feedback to each other as colleagues, this is still good guidance. In fact, it's still graded guidance when we're giving feedback to each other as colleagues. But with colleagues, at least, we're not quite as sensitive. The moment a leader, someone in a formal leadership position, is giving you feedback, it's important that you are, of course, timely, that you give feedback as quickly as possible, but that you keep it positive, constructive, and there's a process for giving feedback that we call the SBID model. Now, some of you who are in HR positions and training positions, some of you on this webinar are probably already very familiar with the SBID model. Many of you who are, in fact, early stage leaders, this may be new to you. And it's actually quite simple, but it's a good, solid framework to use when you're giving anybody feedback, whether the feedback is corrective or constructive or positive. Sometimes I feel like when we give positive feedback, we kind of bury it. We say, "Hey, that was a fantastic presentation." Whereas if I were giving positive feedback using the SBID model, I might say, "Hey, when I came into the meeting room and I knew we were going to spend 30 minutes with you going through that data presentation, I have to be honest, I was feeling a little frustrated because I felt like I had better things to do. But I noticed from the very beginning, you were enthusiastic about the data, and the data that you delivered, you connected the dots to our real world. It made sense to me, and I understood how I could use the data, and the impact that it will have on me is I'm taking that and I'm applying it to my real world, to my job. And I just want to thank you. I want to appreciate it. And in fact, what I would ask is for more. If you could do more of those kinds of presentations, that would be fantastic. So think about that impact versus, "Hey, fantastic presentation. Really appreciated that." Two very different worlds. The impact of the SBID model on positive feedback, uh, even though most of the time we think about SBID as applying to constructive feedback, it can have a huge impact when you're giving somebody, when you really want someone to understand why what they did was great and the impact of that great thing that they did. On the other side, to be able to say, "Here's the situation. I observed this specific behavior, or I saw this specific data in the report," or whatever it was that I specifically was able to see or observe, or whatever the situation was, to be able to detail the situation, the behavior, and then the impact of that behavior before shifting to what needs to change, what needs to be adjusted going forward. And I think feed forward is a great term, Cynthia, as opposed to desired outcome. In fact, I'm going to make a note to myself because I agree with you. Feed forward is basically saying, "Okay, now what? Here's the situation, behavior. Here's the impact of it. Now what? Let's move forward. So one of the things that I find with first-time leaders is many of their behaviors are learned behaviors, sort of natural instinctive behaviors that have worked for them as individual contributors. But now, as the leader of a team, we're going to share with you many new processes, frameworks. These are all research-based, they're all validated, field-tested. And what these help you do is become better at all of the micro behaviors that come along with a leadership position. So suddenly, whereas in the past, you might have given feedback in an instinctive way, not saying that that's wrong, just saying that you might be minimizing the impact of that feedback, the benefits of that feedback, because of more of your more organic or informal approach. What I find with the SBID model is initially it might feel a little bit like a straight jacket, like it, okay, I'm following this artificial process, but you use it for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a bit of time, and it just starts to feel very natural and normal. And suddenly it's not a straight jacket. Suddenly it's just a tracksuit that feels incredibly comfortable. But you'll notice when you are giving feedback, some people will have, and this includes you when you're on the receiving end of feedback, some people will have what we call a fight response. So it's, it would be great if you used the SBID model and at the end, everything was sweetness and sunshine. And and we simply move forward. But there are going to be times where people don't necessarily agree, or maybe they agree, but they're afraid of the feedback. They're afraid of the implications. Perhaps they've worked in an environment where there's a real downside to admitting that you're less than optimal or less than perfect. So you can see on the screen here some of the behaviors that can occur if someone is having an initial fight response to the feedback. Fight responses occur when there is a response like this. Fight responses are relatively, I would call them uncommon. Flight responses are much more common. A flight response might simply look like this. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You make a good point. Yeah, I'll definitely make that adjustment. Yeah, yeah, it won't happen again. Definitely, we'll make that happen. That could very easily be a flight response because I'm simply masking what I'm really thinking. I might really be thinking, what world are you on? What planet are you on? I don't get that. I didn't do that, or that doesn't make sense to me. Or, oh, you're criticizing me. Well, what about the five other people who do things in exactly the same way? I could be thinking lots of different things. It's important as a leader to, uh, to some degree, see around corners, to be able to see behind the mask, so to speak. And it doesn't always happen by you just digging at it. Well, sometimes it can by you asking more questions and peeling the layers away. But this is one of the more challenging skills for first-time or early career leaders, is learning to read people, learning to understand people, learning that there is a whole universe behind the mask. And of course, we all go to work with some degree of mask on. Even the most authentic of us, we have a certain show that we put on. It is part of human nature. It's part of what we do in order to survive in the modern workplace. So as a leader, it's not just that you're managing tasks and productivity. If you're managing humans, if you're managing people, you have to get to know over time all of the humans that you're managing. In fact, one of the best pieces of advice I got years ago was to observe well enough that you can create kind of a baseline behavior model for everyone that you work with, so you understand what's normal for them. So if Phyllis comes to work in the morning and she's kind of edgy and crabby, but that's her baseline. Like her baseline every morning is kind of edgy and crabby, and that is just her. then I'm going to recognize that that's just her operating model. But if Joe, he's normally, has a very different personality and he comes in a little edgy and crabby, I'm going to recognize that as a variance for Joe. So it's not like we're expecting every single person to operate the same in every way. As we are coming close to wrapping this up, I want to flip the script a bit. You as a leader, sometimes you're going to be on the receiving end of feedback. And it's not all going to be fair. If you do a great job of creating an environment of psychological safety, an environment where people feel comfortable coming to you and sharing what they really think, if you, at the end of the year or on a regular basis, you say to each of your folks individually, hey, how am I doing? Just give me some guidance on how I'm doing. I'm amazed at how few leaders take the time to check in with their folks once a quarter or at least once a year and ask that simple question. Tell me how I'm doing. Give me some guidance. Any opportunities to move the needle, to dial up my own performance, I'd be open to anything. It's a great question to ask if you ask it in the right way, within a spirit of psychological safety where the individuals feel comfortable sharing that with you. But now that's the good news. The bad news is sometimes they share. Sometimes I I had a situation, again, I'm going to go back to myself a few years ago. I started asking that question regularly. And the first round where I was going through each of my direct reports and we were doing end of year reviews, and I decided at the end of every one of those reviews, I was going to ask them, okay, so this was about you. Let's talk for a minute about me. How am I doing? Man, good news is I'd created an environment where people were very comfortable. Challenging news is they were very comfortable. And what I got was, here's the thing, Dan, uh, we love that you work hard, but you're late a lot. And you show up to meetings late a lot, and the meetings that you're in, they run over a lot, and your time management could use some work because the time management is having an impact on the rest of us. I have to tell you, the first time I heard that, my instinct was, um, my fight reaction was, oh, I forget, but I wasn't mean. But I really wanted to dismiss. I wanted, what you don't understand is there are things I can't control. What you don't understand is things are shifting all the time. What you don't understand is, and I was absolutely not hearing them. I was not accepting it. And what I would recommend to you as a first-time leader is that you pause and you engage. You don't fight. You don't flee. You engage with empathy. That there's a gift in that feedback. Even if it turns out the feedback is totally wrongheaded, totally incorrect, they've just given you a gift. The gift of telling you how you are perceived. Whether it's right or wrong, you're perceived by at least one human, the one in front of you, in a certain way. And being willing to see that feedback as a gift comes with maturity. It comes with willingness to not always be the fountain of all wisdom, the fountain of all whatever. So recognize that for a leader, all feedback is a gift. Even the totally unfair and wrong feedback is a gift because it gives you some insight into how others are perceiving you. So with that, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I do want you to know next week, so I'm going to fast forward. As you can see, oh, look, there's a whole bunch of other content. However, we do have another webinar, a follow-up webinar coming up next Wednesday, I believe it is. It's March 14th. So I think that's a follow-up webinar for March 14th. I forget what day of the week that it is. And I know that Devesh is going to put this link into the chat. So if you happen to want to immediately register for the follow-up webinar, you are welcome to do that. And what we're going to do is continue on with many more topics related to emerging or first-time leaders. So Devesh, I'm waiting to see that link. And if I don't, there it is. Okay, there's the link. So you can register, but rest assured, you will be receiving a follow-up document with the content related to today's session. And then hopefully we'll see you again on March 14th, and we will continue the dialogue and share more insights with you. Thanks, everybody. Truly appreciate your engagement for a full 60 minutes. Hopefully it went by fast. That's the goal. Make it fly by so fast because of the practical application. And we'll hopefully see you again in about 2 weeks. Thanks.